Welcome to Instruqt Tutorials. In this video, we'll discuss how to create your first lab in Instruqt. Before we get started, make sure you've gone through the setup and configuration steps provided in the documentation. Let's create a new lab using one of Instruqt's starter templates in the CLI. Open up your terminal and run instruct lab init. We need to enter a lab title. Let's call this My First Lab. The CLI will turn that into a folder name with a slug like my-first-lab and create it in our current directory. Hit enter to move along to the next section. Now we need to pick a starter template for our lab. For this example, we'll use the empty skeleton template. Each template comes with its own setup to help you get started based on your use case. Hit enter, and now it's asking us if we want to create our lab. Everything looks good, so let's hit enter. Great job! To upload our lab to Instruqt, we'll use the GitHub integration. This lets you manage content with your typical developer workflows. Let's log into GitHub and create a new empty repo to store our lab's configuration. While it's possible to use a mono repo setup, we'll keep it simple here and create a dedicated repo just for this lab. To create our repository, click New, and then add a repository name. We'll call it My First Lab to match our lab directory, but you can call it whatever you like. We can also add a description, but for now, let's leave that blank. Next, we need to choose if it is public or private. If you're using a personal account rather than an organization, make sure to set this to public. To keep the initial commit simpler, do not initialize with a README, gitignore, or license. Now click Create Repository, and we see our empty repo along with setup instructions. Copy the URL from the Quick Setup if you've done this kind of thing before section. We're going to use this in a minute. Now we want to push our lab to GitHub. Navigate to the lab directory by typing cd my first lab. Let's initialize the Git repository with git init. We're going to use main as the default branch name from now on, so let's set that with git branch-m main. Now we'll link our local lab folder to the GitHub repo we just created. So we'll type git remote add origin and paste in the URL that we copied from GitHub. So it should look something like this. Now that our local folder is linked to the remote repo, we can add and commit our files with git add period. This tells Git which changes to track. The period after add means we want to include everything in the current directory. Let's commit our changes with a short message describing them. Since this is our first commit, we'll use a common message like initial commit. Now that our changes are committed, we're ready to push them to GitHub. Because this is the first time you are pushing to the remote repository, you will need to set the upstream branch. So let's type git push -u origin main. Type in the passkey you created earlier. If you get an error here, it's because your default branch is not called main. Use the default branch name instead. Great job! Now let's import our lab into Instruqt. Go to the Labs section and click Import Lab. Search and select the GitHub repo we created earlier and click Next. If your repo doesn't show up, double check that the Instruqt GitHub app has access to it. Let's give our lab a name, My First Lab. This becomes the lab slug. If your lab lives on a different branch or tag than main, you can set the ref, but we'll leave it blank for now to use the default. Next, set the path to where the lab lives in the repo. If you're not using a mono repo, just leave it empty. It'll default to the root. You'll see the repo URL at the bottom for reference. Now let's click Import. Great! We see our lab in the labs list. Well done. The status behind the lab has a check mark and this hashtag text here. The first part of this success message is the hash of the latest commit that was found on GitHub. Click Start to launch the lab. Now Instruqt will create our lab environment. Once it's ready, click Enter Lab. It looks a bit bare at the moment, but we'll explore how to build it out in other videos. To exit the lab, click the Stop button at the top right. Great job! For more information on getting started with Instruqt and how to create your first lab, head to our documentation page.